One of the kind of trends that keeps coming up on the podcast, especially in the most recent episodes, is this kind of juxtaposition between the U.S. and China. So, I mean, I know that you're situated in the States and you probably have much more experience, but also many more examples of what's happening in the States. I've been trying to kind of follow as best as I can about what's happening in China, but could you maybe touch on that a little bit? Like, is it comparable to what's happening in the States? Are they more advanced? Maybe picking on some of these maybe more low-hanging cities that are available for these autonomous vehicle deployments to happen?
Yeah. So I can tell you that in the last year, the amount of information that I've gotten of what's happening in China has reduced substantially. As
Mm,
like there's been less and less conferences and abilities
right.
to track some of these things. The I'll tell you the there's a whole lot of advancements happening over there, and there was the same kind of proclamations that we're hearing here of like in 2 years we're going to have X numbers all over and those things
Hmm.
have not happened, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
the rollout is still more methodical, we'll say, than what was being said a couple of years back. One of the big issues that China has, that we could say is a benefit for the deployment of the technology. I'm not sure if it's necessarily a benefit for the overall outcome,
Hmm.
but is that there's much more, the regulatory structure is obviously less democratic.
Hmm.
And so if the government says like, well, this is something we should be doing or we should be testing in these areas, then it is allowed by right. And there you
Right,
go. And
right.
there will be support for these things, which in the U.S. is much more nuanced and difficult. And the relationship with the city is kind of an important thing that the AV companies are paying a lot more attention to.
Hmm.
Um, in terms of where the technology is going, who's going to get there first, I think that's still very much up in the air. In the
Hmm.
U.S., the obvious leaders are Waymo and GM Cruise. Are
Hmm.
doing like they've got the most number of miles kind of logged. There's a whole host of other companies that are, I think, not far behind, but those are the two leaders here. Didi's really pushing a lot of things in China. Unknown where who's gonna end up really figuring this out first or most.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
So I think the listeners would hate me if I didn't ask, but where does Tesla compare to this? Because I think Tesla gets the most amount of press from maybe all the other ones. So could you touch on that? I know it's potentially a controversial topic, but
Yeah.
interesting nonetheless.
So, and I should mention, like, I am not an expert on AV
Hmm. Hmm.
technology,
Hmm.
right? I mean, what we mostly look at is the impacts on these things.
Yeah.
So I'm a consumer of a lot of that information, but I'm not by no means an expert. I'll tell you all the companies that we've talked to who, and they've got their own interests in this, so take it with a grain of salt. But they say, the big difficulty that Tesla has is that it is based all on, it doesn't use LiDAR.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so LiDAR is a laser kind of 3D understanding of what your environment is,
Hmm.
which is more complicated and more expensive. And so Tesla does not use that technology. All the AV companies I've spoken to, which all use that technology, so again, take it with a grain of salt, say that it is completely irresponsible to
Hmm.
be trying to create AVs in sophisticated kind of environments without using LiDAR, and that we will continue to see more and more accidents as that happens. Um, so um, a big sticking point. If it turns out that Tesla's like onto something and you can really do this, and they are promoting it much more, in my
Right.
opinion,
Right. Right.
much more than they probably should. It's kind of hard to call something, what's it, the fully automated driving when it is not fully automated driving.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, um, that is creating problems, and you see it in the crashes that have happened.
Hmm.
Uh, my sense is we'll continue to see more of those. And then the big question is, are those crashes because the technology is not there yet, or are those crashes because that technology will never get there?
Right. Right.
Right, and they need to really rethink the entire piece of that. So I put them a little bit outside of the because of that, what I've been hearing from a number of the different
Hmm.
companies and people who really track the technology side of this. And that adds a whole nother, which maybe we'll talk about later on, of the question of like, are these things privately owned or not privately owned,
Right.
which
Right.
is a huge kind of difference.